Please join us on our recent trip to Arizona and New Mexico with friends Brian and Maria. We met our travel companions near the town of Amboy in the Mojave Desert on Thursday night. We awoke to a nice view of Amboy Crater, then headed east to Homology State Park near Winslow in northeastern Arizona. We arrived at Homology in the early afternoon and found the campground to be quite nice. The rest of the afternoon was spent exploring two of the main habitation sites, Homology 1 and Homology 2. Here, Ginny is looking at a rock art panel. Broken potsherds, chipstone artifacts, and groundstone fragments litter the ground at Homology. Our group walking back to camp in the early evening. The next morning, after standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona for a while, we were off to a place called Rock Art Ranch. After an orientation at the main ranch, we were escorted out to several sites of interest on the property. Note the two large pieces of petrified wood next to the entrance arch. This is one of several sites that have been excavated by various universities over the years. The ranch owner constructed this shed to protect the site from the elements. In another area, we were shown several Native American structures. Some were original and some were replicas. Here, Maria enters a hogan. The interior of the hogan. Again, as with Homology, potsherds were everywhere. A local relaxing in the shade. Our guide then took us to a wash that contained this large flat shelf of sandstone. Numerous images had been pecked into the surface as well as a map of the immediate area. This shelter marks the entrance to the steep-walled Chevelon Canyon, where most of the rock art is located. On this sandstone boulder, you can see what appears to be a large foot. Part of the foot was naturally occurring, and part was embellished by humans. The type of rock art found here are called petroglyphs. The stone is covered with a naturally occurring dark patina called desert varnish. People peck through the varnish with a small stone to reveal the lighter-colored subsurface rock. Brian and Maria. Water in the canyon flows all year, and it must have been a magnet for humans and other animals in this parched desert. Here, we see two examples of the extremely rare desert mermaid. Climbing out of the canyon, note the signs above the gate. That afternoon, we bought supplies in Holbrook, which is the southern gateway to the Petrified Forest National Park and home of the famous Wigwam Motel. Maria's family owns 160 acres of land outside of Holbrook called Rancho Milagro, where we would spend the next 2 nights. Our gracious hosts, John and Ida. That afternoon, John spotted a cow that was not supposed to be on the property. Modern cowboys that we are, John and I went down to confront the cow and find out where the fence was breached to allow her in. After a bit of wrangling, we managed to shoo her through the opening from whence she came and temporarily secured the fence gap. After all that cowboying, a beer was in order. Here's Brian, the tri-tip king, doing what he does best. We camped in this secluded flat area for the 2 nights that we were at the ranch. The following day, Monday, we made a brief stop at Zuni Pueblo so that Brian could arrange for a tour when he returns in September with his geology group. From there, we moved on to El Morro National Monument. This spring provides water on a year-round basis, so this too was an area that continually attracted people and animals. The sandstone faces near the spring are known as Inscription Rock because of the historic and prehistoric graffiti that adorns them. In addition to petroglyphs from the Native Americans, there are inscriptions from early Spanish explorers dating to the 1500s and from later travelers as well. A hike to the top of the stone monolith that is El Morro reveals the ruins of 2 Anasazi Pueblo dwellings. These ruins date to the late AD 1200s. Hauling water up to these dwellings must have been quite a feat. Our camp at El Morro. El Morro as seen from the campground. On Tuesday morning, we were slated to meet Ginny's nephew Eric, who works for the Park Service at El Malpais National Monument. Eric is a resource manager and has a strong background as a spelunker or caver. He offered to take us down into one of the many lava tubes that are found in this region. He supplied us with helmets, headlamps, knee pads, and leather gloves. We got a fascinating introduction to the world of lava tubes. Unfortunately, I took a pretty good tumble and banged myself up. Nonetheless, we all enjoyed the experience and had a great time. That night, at Eric's urging, we camped in Bonita Canyon. It was a great suggestion on Eric's part. The next morning, on our way to Grants, New Mexico, we came across this Marine Corps Osprey doing some practice landings. In this photo, he is descending. And in this one, the wings and propellers have rotated 90 degrees for more conventional flight. This was the first time I had ever seen one in operation. Pretty cool. Grants is one of the many small towns in the Southwest that exploit their Route 66 heritage. The day before, Eric had suggested that we visit the mining museum in Grants. So that's what we did. Beneath the museum, they have constructed a replica of one of the many uranium mines that dotted the surrounding landscape. The museum was very interesting, and we were all glad that we made the stop. Later that day, we stopped at a Chaco outlier that Brian had been to many years ago. It is relatively small and is called Kinya-A. Its most prominent feature is this large tower kiva. The brilliant red of this blooming cactus stood in stark contrast to the surrounding foliage. Our trucks attracted this curious critter. Brian looks determined to stare him down. Later that afternoon, we arrived at the Bisti Badlands, a truly unique area that none of us had ever been to. We took a quick hike, but decided to do our primary exploring the next morning. It's hard to make out, but the camp area is out on that flat plain. We woke before sunup and were on the road a few minutes after 6 a.m. In this next section, I'll let the pictures speak for themselves. The shapes that result from wind and water erosion are simply amazing. For good reason, this section of the Bisti is known as the Cracked Egg Garden. You have to wonder how something like this happens. This looks like a pecking chicken to me. From this vantage point, this looks like an angel with one arm outstretched and a large book in the other. But from the other side, it takes on the appearance of a goose in flight. More cracked eggs. From Bisti, we traveled north to Farmington, New Mexico, and then east to Aztec Ruins National Monument. One of the truly unique features of Aztec ruins is this reconstructed Great Kiva. The reconstruction gives you a much better understanding of what these buildings looked like when they were in use. Notice that the doorways are all quite small. Brian and I making our way through the structure. This gopher snake was taking some shade beneath a small pine tree at Aztec. Next, we stopped briefly at Salmon Ruins but did not tour the structures there. Instead, we headed to Angel Peak Campground. It was a nice BLM facility with very few occupants. The view from the campsite. In the morning, we set out to find Pueblo Pintado. While looking, we came across this small structure under a rock outcropping. In Utah, they would call this a moki. The ruins at Pueblo Pintado are fairly extensive. This three-story complex is also a Chaco outlier. Lots of potsherds on the ground, but few remnants of stone tools. After departing Pueblo Pintado, we said goodbye to Brian and Maria in Crown Point, New Mexico, and struck out for home. That night we stayed at Haluapai Mountain Park outside of Kingman, Arizona, a very nice place and one that we will remember for future travels. We arrived home at 3 p.m. on Saturday, May 12th. As always, Jenny added to her magnet collection on this trip. We were out for 10 days, only had to pay for camping on 2 occasions, and overall had a great trip. Thanks for taking the time to watch our slideshow. We hope you enjoyed it.